On October 16, 1909, quarterback Earl Wilson of Navy was playing against Villanova when he was seriously injured while making a flying tackle. The back of his neck struck the ground very hard. His neck was broken, fracturing between the fourth and fifth cervical vertebrae, paralyzing him from the shoulders down. According to newspaper articles, Wilson put up a plucky fight, but succumbed to his injury on April 16, 1910. On October 30th, 1909, just 2 weeks after Wilson sustained his fatal injury, Army tackle Eugene Byrne was killed on the field playing against Harvard. Harvard had been running mass plays directly at Byrne for a good portion of the game. According to historian John Watterson, umpire Edward K. Hall later recalled that Byrne was virtually dead on his feet. The play had been steadily directed at Byrne, and he was all tired out. Al Sharp, who was refereeing the game, sent word to the Army coach to take him out of the game. The Army coach did not take him out. Byrne was slightly injured on a short forward pass to Harvard's Hamilton Fish. Then Harvard ran another play directly at Byrne, throwing him to the ground. He did not get up. According to newspaper accounts, only the immediate resort to artificial respiration kept the boy from almost instant death, for he did not draw a natural breath after receiving the fatal shock. Byrne regained consciousness during the night, but slipped back into a coma and died at 6 a.m. the following morning. An X-ray taken after his death showed a dislocation of the vertebrae in his neck that caused lesions in the nerve center affecting his breathing. I'm John Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. I started this channel in the hopes of telling the real history about the game we love. So if you're a fan of history or of college football, hit the subscribe button so we can hit 1,000 subscribers this season. I would greatly appreciate it. 2 weeks after Byrne's death, a promising young halfback at the University of Virginia named Archer Christian was seriously injured in a game against Georgetown. During a mass play, and there's some controversy about that, Christian broke through the Georgetown left side for a gain of 8 yards, but then he was tackled and other players fell on top of him. He did not get up and, barely conscious, was carried to the sidelines. "Oh, I'm suffering, Pop," he told the trainer. "Please do something for me." He then slipped into a coma. He would die the next morning of hemorrhaging in his brain. Wilson, Byrne, and Christian were the first of many high-profile deaths and injuries that would lead college football into another existential crisis. Unlike the crisis of 1905, which is caused by a combination of newspaper sensationalism, deaths accredited of football, which were not actually caused by football, and critics having their day, the 1909 crisis would almost completely focus on deaths and injuries. The 1909 crisis is largely forgotten by college football because it doesn't have the celebrity of Teddy Roosevelt to which to attach its name. Remember that Teddy Roosevelt saved football and everything was just gravy after that. Just for fun, here's some homework. Well, don't call it homework if you don't like homework. Just for fun, here's something interesting to do. Google the phrase 1905 college football crisis and see what you get. And then change that to 1909 college football crisis and compare the two. And you can see for yourself what I mean when I say it's been forgotten. Like the 1905 crisis, the crisis in 1909 would require serious changes to the game in order for football to survive. The 1909 crisis and its aftermath are the subject of this college football history video. The immediate effect of the injury to Wilson and the deaths of Eugene Byrne and Archer Christian was that Navy, Army, and Virginia canceled their remaining football games. Georgetown followed, and North Carolina canceled its final game against Virginia. On November 16, 1909, the New York Times ran an editorial entitled "Stop the Mass Plays." The editorial stated, "Wherever a football player has received fatal injuries, at West Point, at Annapolis, and at Georgetown University, the institution of which the fatality has occurred has seen fit to cancel all future games for this season. That is appropriate. Stop the game after the boy is killed. But the presidents and the faculties of other universities are blind, and strangely blind, to the greater propriety of canceling all the games before the next boy is killed. After 3 such accidents, 2 experienced and skillful players in the leading teams, the public has a right to demand that football be abolished or it be completely reformed forthwith. It is not a case, especially for the Intercollegiate Rules Committee, that once august body has abused its privileges and its functions. The committee assured the public had, in truth, been reformed from the reforms of 1906, the rules that were passed. If you haven't watched it yet, you might go back and watch that video after this one is done, of course. So the public had been informed or told that the chances of unfair, brutal, and dangerous play had been eliminated so far as the rules could eliminate them. Yet the Times last Sunday, the New York Times, was able to reproduce in its picture section a page full of photographs showing the execution of mass plays, tacklings, and interference in the recent football games that made accidents such as occurred to Cadet Byrne and young Christian highly possible. And I know the photo isn't the best, but the reproduction that I have wasn't the best either. The president or the faculty of any university that permits the games to continue under the rules for mass plays is assuming a heavy responsibility. So quite a scathing article from the New York Times. And just so we're clear on what constitutes a mass play. A mass play is when a mass of players converge on a single point on the defense, typically the defensive guard or the tackle position. Eugene Byrne's death was a direct result as this type of play, and as I said earlier, his defensive tackle position was repeatedly targeted throughout the game in which he died. There were a huge number of rules changes in 1906 to reform the game, or so they were told, that focused on making the game safer. However, they did not specifically outlaw mass play, and there were no rules against pushing and pulling a ball carrier, nor were there rules against interlocked arms, which were frequently used for interference, and again, interference is known as blocking in today's game. So what would happen is the ball carrier would run at the point of attack with blockers in front of him, blockers who had their arms interlocked, which sounds really evil compared to the way we do it now, and teammates on each side whose teammates would literally pull him along, and his teammates behind him would push him if necessary. And if the ball carrier happened to fall down, he could still get up and keep running, because the rule for being called down at the time included the dangerous phrase, while in the grasp of an opponent. So it wasn't enough to just be down on the ground. If you were the ball carrier, you could have your teammates pull you along down the field, even if you were laying or crawling on the ground. And if the referee didn't blow his whistle because he didn't think the opponents had a hold of you or a grasp, then you weren't down. And the result was defensive players would jump on you while you were on the ground. Your offensive teammates would try to keep the defenders off of you. And the result of all of that is a mass of bodies falling together, and all of that weight being forced upon a person who was at the bottom of the pile, which is likely how Eugene Byrne and Archer Christian died. The rules of the time specified there only had to be 6 players on the offensive line, or the line of scrimmage, as opposed to the 7 we have now. At the time, there could be 1 man in motion, but he didn't have to come set for 1 second before the play started like we do now. Note that Byrne, Christian, and Wilson are not the only deaths in football in 1909. One article I found stated that 30 players across college and high school died that season. The article further states, another startling disclosure is that football caused greatest havoc among college and university players. And this is important because it had been believed by the faculties of many of the institutions that the new style of play as taught by skilled hired coaches would eliminate the dangers of the game. The contrary appears true, since fewest were injured outside of the colleges where no coaches were employed. And the crisis in 1905, few college players were killed. And it was generally believed that players were killed in football because they were out of shape, unprepared, or not properly trained. But the crisis in 1909 made it clear that football itself is killing all the players. It's the style of play, specifically mass play. Now, the historian John Watterson relates a letter from Harvard president Charles Eliot, who was one of football's most prominent critics, to Edwin Alderman, the president of the University of Virginia. And recall that Archer Christian played for the University of Virginia. Alderman is having problems reconciling the death of his student with continuing the game of football, at least in its current form. Watterson's book, College Football, History, Spectacle, Controversy, includes this passage. Eliot deplored the time-honored defense by supporters of football. Men are killed and wounded, Eliot conceded, in hunting, rowing, riding horseback on a road or in steeplechase, sailing boats, canoeing, and climbing mountains. But what distinguished from football from other dangerous sports, he insisted, was that the dangers in football resulted from the risks of the game deliberately planned and deliberately maintained. The threat of death and injury on the football field resulted not from random accidents, but from playing the game according to the rules. That's pretty scathing stuff. Again, there is much uproar as colleges and prep schools across the nation abolish football in November 1909. The New York Public Schools calls an end to football, as does Washington, D.C. The movement sweeps the nation. It includes Jesuit colleges, as the article states, Georgetown, Fordham, Holy Cross, and 9 other colleges throughout the East. Several states are prepared to pass laws outlawing football. So at the end of 1909, college football is once again in an existential crisis. The possibility of the game being outlawed or abolished, or in some cases, particularly on the West Coast, replaced by rugby. It is clear that mass play must be completely eliminated for the game to continue. The problem is mass play is favored by the most powerful teams and rules makers in college football. Now, what happens next? Sounds like a clickbait title, doesn't it? You'll never believe what happens next. But what happens next will set the stage for truly modern football. I'm John Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. I started this channel in the hopes of telling the real history of the game we love. I hope you enjoy these videos. Please tell your friends, your neighbors, their dogs, anybody that might find this interesting. And please subscribe to this channel so that it can grow. Thank you.